Some acts of courage are so unexpected that they forever divide a person's life into before and after. The annual Hope for Tomorrow Charity Gala transformed the city botanical gardens into a breathtaking sea of glowing lanterns, elegant white tents, and blooming roses that stretched beneath the warm evening sky. Local families, business leaders, volunteers, and community organizations gathered with one shared purpose: raising funds for children's hospitals and neighborhood education programs. Gentle music drifted through the gardens while laughter mixed with the soft sound of fountains flowing across polished stone pathways. Adrian Cole, a respected white mafia boss known for his quiet authority and unwavering loyalty to those he loved, rarely attended public events unless his mother insisted. Evelyn Cole believed generosity should always be visible, especially when it inspired others to give. Standing beside her throughout the evening was Naomi Carter, the young black maid who had served the Cole household for several years with remarkable humility. Naomi was never the center of attention. She quietly adjusted Evelyn's shawl when the evening breeze became cooler, offered water to elderly guests before anyone asked, and smiled warmly at every volunteer regardless of their position. Many visitors assumed she was simply another member of the household staff. Very few realized how deeply Evelyn trusted her, or how often Naomi had placed other people's comfort ahead of her own. Adrian noticed those quiet acts only in passing. He appreciated Naomi's reliability, but had never truly paused to understand the character hidden behind her gentle smile. To him, she was dependable, respectful, and almost invisible within the rhythm of the estate. As the evening progressed, Evelyn accepted an invitation to greet donors near the central garden stage, where children from a local music academy had just finished performing. Naomi followed a few respectful steps behind, carrying a light shawl and a small bottle of water in case Evelyn needed either. The crowd applauded as organizers thanked every supporter for making the event possible. Flashing cameras captured smiling faces while guests slowly gathered closer to hear the closing remarks. Then, without warning, a sudden disturbance erupted near one side of the garden entrance. Several startled voices echoed across the courtyard as people instinctively stepped away from the unexpected commotion. Security personnel immediately moved toward the source, directing families and volunteers towards safer open spaces with calm but urgent instructions. Adrian turned sharply from a conversation with the event director the instant he heard the change in the crowd. From across the garden, he saw confusion spreading rapidly toward the stage where his mother remained. Time seemed to slow. Before he could reach her, Naomi reacted first. She did not hesitate or wait for instructions. She moved instinctively toward Evelyn, placing herself between the older woman and the unfolding danger with nothing but quiet determination written across her face. Her only concern was ensuring that Evelyn could be guided away from the growing panic surrounding the stage. Moments later, emergency responders arrived and immediately took control of the scene, escorting everyone away from the crowded area while providing urgent medical assistance to those affected by the frightening incident. Adrian reached his mother only seconds later, relieved to find Evelyn physically safe, but overwhelmed by what had just happened. His eyes then searched desperately until they found Naomi being cared for by emergency medical professionals nearby. Though conscious, she appeared exhausted after risking everything to protect another person without the slightest thought for herself. Evelyn gently held Adrian's trembling hand and whispered through grateful tears, "She never stopped thinking about me, even when everyone else was trying to save themselves." Adrian stood frozen beneath the fading glow of the garden lanterns, unable to speak as he looked toward the young woman he had never truly seen until that unforgettable night. And for the first time in many years, he realized that the greatest courage often belongs to the quietest heart. The bright lights of the emergency department reflected across polished floors long after the charity event had faded into silence. Families reunited in quiet relief. Volunteers comforted frightened children, and medical professionals moved with calm efficiency through the corridors. Adrian Cole remained outside a treatment room, unable to pull his thoughts away from the image that had replayed endlessly in his mind since the garden had descended into confusion. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Naomi Carter placing herself between his mother and the unexpected danger without hesitation. It was not an act of obligation. It was not part of her job. It was a decision made in less than a heartbeat by someone who valued another person's life more than her own comfort. Evelyn Cole sat nearby, wrapped in a light blanket offered by one of the nurses. Though physically unharmed, emotion remained visible in her gentle eyes. She quietly watched her son pacing the hallway, something she had not seen him do since he was a young man, facing the uncertainty of his father's illness many years earlier. Adrian rarely allowed fear to show. Tonight he no longer tried to hide it. After speaking briefly with the attending physician, he returned to his mother and lowered himself into the chair beside her. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence between them carried gratitude, shock, and countless unspoken questions. Finally, Adrian asked softly, "How long has she been protecting everyone around her without anyone noticing?" Evelyn smiled sadly. "Much longer than either of us realized." Adrian turned toward her with quiet surprise. Evelyn continued gently. "There were mornings when she arrived before sunrise because one of the gardeners had injured his back, and she wanted to help finish his work before anyone else noticed. There were evenings when she stayed after her shift to read to Mrs. Dawson from the neighboring estate, because her family lived several states away. She repaired broken toys for children who visited the house. She quietly paid for groceries when one of the kitchen assistants struggled through a difficult month. She never mentioned any of it because kindness was simply the way she lived." Adrian listened without interrupting. Every sentence felt like another door, opening onto a life he had never taken the time to understand. He had trusted Naomi completely inside his home, yet he knew almost nothing about the person behind her warm smile. His mother looked toward the treatment room before speaking again. Today was not the first time she placed someone else before herself. It was only the first time you happened to see it. Those words settled deeply inside Adrian's heart. Hours passed before a physician finally approached them with a reassuring expression. Naomi had responded well to treatment and was expected to recover, although she would need time, careful observation, and rest. Relief washed quietly across Adrian's face, followed almost immediately by guilt. While everyone else had recognized Naomi's generous spirit for years, he had accepted her presence as though compassion were simply another household responsibility. He thanked the physician sincerely before asking one careful question. "May I see her for just a moment?" The physician smiled kindly, but explained that Naomi was resting comfortably and visitors would be allowed after she regained more strength. Adrian nodded respectfully. He did not argue. Instead, he stood outside the closed door for several silent minutes, looking through the small window where he could just make out her peaceful figure resting beneath soft hospital lights. He realized that for the first time since Naomi had entered his family's life, he was not seeing a dependable employee. He was seeing a courageous woman whose quiet character had protected the people he loved without ever asking for recognition. As dawn slowly painted the eastern sky with pale shades of gold, Adrian made a silent promise that when Naomi finally opened her eyes again, she would never have to wonder whether her courage had been seen, because from that morning forward, he intended to learn everything about the extraordinary heart that had quietly changed his family forever. Morning sunlight filtered gently through the hospital windows, casting long golden beams across the quiet corridor where another day had begun. Nurses exchanged warm greetings, volunteers delivered fresh flowers to patient rooms, and the comforting aroma of coffee drifted from the small family waiting area. Inside one of the private recovery rooms, Naomi Carter rested peacefully as doctors continued monitoring her steady improvement. She remained weak but stable, surrounded by soft light and reassuring voices that reminded everyone recovery was moving in the right direction. Adrian Cole arrived shortly after sunrise, carrying nothing more than a simple bouquet of white roses and a hardcover novel he had noticed resting on Naomi's bedside table during his brief glance through the doorway the previous night. He quietly placed both gifts on a nearby chair after learning she was still asleep. He did not wish to disturb her. Instead, he stepped back into the hallway where Evelyn was already waiting with 2 warm cups of tea. The older woman smiled gently as she handed one to her son. "You came early again," she observed. Adrian accepted the cup without taking his eyes from the hospital room. "It feels like the least I can do." Evelyn rested her hand lightly against his arm. "The least you can do is not what she deserves." Her words lingered between them as they walked slowly toward a quiet sitting area overlooking the hospital garden. Colorful flowers swayed gently beneath the spring breeze, while patients and families found peaceful moments on shaded benches below. Adrian broke the silence first. "Mother, why did nobody ever tell me who Naomi truly was?" Evelyn looked thoughtfully toward the garden before answering. "Many people tried. You simply never realized they were telling you." Adrian frowned slightly. Evelyn continued with quiet patience. "Every holiday our staff voted anonymously for the coworker who inspired them the most. Naomi received more votes than anyone else every single year. The gardeners admired her because she always offered help before finishing her own work. The kitchen staff admired her because she remembered every birthday without writing any dates down. Even our neighbors knew her by name because she visited elderly residents who had nobody else to spend time with. You heard those stories countless times. You simply believed they described a kind employee instead of an extraordinary person." Adrian lowered his eyes. Every memory returned with uncomfortable clarity. Casual conversations he had overlooked. Small compliments he had never questioned. Quiet moments he had dismissed because business responsibilities always demanded his attention. He suddenly realized how easily remarkable people could become invisible when kindness was expected rather than appreciated. Determined to understand more, Adrian left the hospital later that afternoon and quietly visited the community center Naomi supported during her free time. The director welcomed him with surprised gratitude and showed him a small reading room filled with donated books. Children's artwork decorated the colorful walls. One little girl pointed proudly toward a shelf of storybooks. "Miss Naomi helped us build that," she said with a bright smile. Another volunteer explained that Naomi spent nearly every Saturday reading with children, organizing food drives, repairing old furniture, and encouraging teenagers preparing for college interviews. She never asked for photographs, certificates, or public recognition. When donations arrived, she always insisted other volunteers receive the credit because she believed gratitude should belong to everyone involved. Adrian quietly walked through every room, listening far more than speaking. Everywhere he went, people remembered Naomi for the same reason. Not because she had done one extraordinary thing, but because she had chosen hundreds of ordinary acts of kindness over many years without expecting anything in return. As the afternoon sun settled lower across the city skyline, Adrian returned to the hospital carrying no answers, only a deeper sense of humility. Standing once again outside Naomi's room, he watched her resting peacefully while the white roses remained untouched beside the window. For the first time in his life, he understood that true greatness could live inside the quietest person in any room, hidden not by weakness, but by a heart so devoted to serving others that it never paused to ask whether anyone was watching. And that realization changed the way Adrian would forever measure strength, success, and the people fortunate enough to walk beside him. 3 quiet days passed before Naomi Carter finally opened her eyes to the gentle morning light streaming through the hospital window. The room smelled faintly of fresh flowers, warm tea, and the crisp scent of clean linen. A small vase of white roses rested beside her bed, replaced every morning without fail, although nobody ever mentioned who had brought them. The nurses quickly noticed that each bouquet arrived before sunrise and was always accompanied by a single handwritten note containing nothing more than a simple message wishing her strength for another day of recovery. Naomi smiled softly each time she read the words, believing they had been sent anonymously by someone from the charity event. She never imagined Adrian Cole had personally delivered every arrangement before beginning his own day. Outside her room, Adrian continued arriving at nearly the same hour every morning. He never entered without permission and never interrupted her rest. Instead, he spoke briefly with the physicians, carefully listened to every update, thanked each member of the medical team, and quietly left another bouquet before returning to his responsibilities. The doctors soon noticed his consistency. One physician remarked that very few family members demonstrated such patient devotion, let alone an employer. Adrian simply answered, "Some debts cannot be measured by money." Meanwhile, Evelyn Cole visited Naomi every afternoon. Unlike Adrian, she spent long conversations beside the bed sharing cheerful stories from the estate. She described the roses blooming outside the front entrance, the gardeners arguing playfully over whose tomatoes would ripen first, and the elderly golden retriever who continued waiting faithfully near the kitchen door every evening expecting Naomi to appear with his favorite treat. Those ordinary stories made the hospital room feel less distant from home. Naomi laughed gently for the first time since the frightening incident, and every smile brought visible relief to Evelyn's heart. On the fourth morning, Adrian finally received permission to visit while Naomi was awake. He paused quietly outside the doorway. Before knocking softly, Naomi looked toward him with visible surprise. "Good morning, sir," she said warmly, attempting to sit a little straighter. Adrian immediately shook his head. "Please remain comfortable." His calm voice carried unusual gentleness. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The silence felt respectful rather than awkward. Adrian finally glanced toward the white roses beside the window. "I hope they made the room feel a little brighter." Naomi blinked in surprise. "You brought them?" Adrian nodded quietly. "Every morning." Naomi lowered her eyes, deeply touched. "You did not have to do that." Adrian answered without hesitation. "I wanted to." Again, silence settled between them, but this time it carried gratitude instead of uncertainty. Adrian carefully placed a new novel on the bedside table after noticing she had nearly finished the previous one. "My mother told me you enjoy stories with hopeful endings," he said. Naomi smiled softly. "She remembers everything." Adrian returned the smile. "She learned that from you." Naomi looked puzzled. Adrian continued gently. "I have spent the past few days discovering how many lives you have quietly changed. Children at the community center know your name. Our employees speak about your kindness with admiration. My mother trusts you as though you were family. Somehow I lived beside all of that without truly seeing it." Naomi shook her head modestly. "I only tried to help whenever I could." Adrian looked directly at her with quiet sincerity. "That is exactly what makes it extraordinary." Before leaving, he hesitated briefly at the doorway. "There is no pressure to return before you are completely ready," he said. "Your place in our home is waiting for you, but your health comes first." Naomi thanked him with grateful eyes. After Adrian quietly departed, one of the nurses entered to check her progress. She smiled knowingly after seeing the fresh flowers and the unread novel resting beside the bed. "You have people who care about you very deeply," she observed. Naomi looked toward the morning sunlight dancing across the white roses and whispered almost to herself, "I think they are only beginning to understand why kindness is worth protecting." Outside the hospital, Adrian paused beneath the bright spring sky before leaving for the estate, carrying with him a quiet sense of peace that had been missing for many years, knowing that gratitude had already begun healing far more than one courageous heart. Nearly 3 weeks after the charity gala, the doctors finally approved Naomi Carter's return home with one important condition. She would need additional weeks of rest before resuming any demanding responsibilities. The announcement brought visible relief to everyone who had quietly followed her recovery, yet Naomi herself appeared almost embarrassed by the attention. As she slowly gathered the few personal belongings beside her hospital bed, she thanked every nurse, physician, therapist, and volunteer individually, remembering each person's name despite everything she had endured. One nurse smiled warmly after receiving another heartfelt thank you. "Most patients are eager to leave," she said. "You are somehow making all of us feel appreciated instead." Naomi laughed softly. Kindness should always travel in both directions. Outside the hospital entrance, the spring afternoon shimmered beneath clear blue skies. Adrian Cole had arranged comfortable transportation without mentioning it beforehand, hoping only to make Naomi's journey easier. When she stepped through the sliding doors beside Evelyn Cole, she paused in surprise after seeing Adrian waiting quietly near the vehicle. He greeted her not as an employer welcoming an employee, but as someone sincerely grateful to see another person safely returning home. "Welcome back," he said gently. Naomi smiled. "It feels wonderful to see the sunshine again." The drive toward the estate passed peacefully through tree-lined streets, bursting with new blossoms. Evelyn filled the conversation with cheerful stories about neighbors, garden projects, and the many letters Naomi had received from children at the community center wishing her continued healing. Adrian listened quietly from the front seat, occasionally glancing into the rearview mirror as Naomi laughed at Evelyn's stories. That laughter brought him unexpected comfort. Upon arriving at the estate, Naomi expected to slip quietly through the employee entrance exactly as she had done for years. Instead, she found every member of the household staff waiting together beneath the front portico. Gardeners, housekeepers, drivers, chefs, maintenance workers, and office assistants stood side by side, holding simple bouquets gathered from the estate gardens. There were no elaborate decorations, no speeches, and no photographers. Only genuine smiles and heartfelt applause welcomed her home. Naomi immediately became emotional. "You should not have done all this for me," she whispered. Eleanor Hayes, the longtime head housekeeper, stepped forward with a gentle embrace. "We did not do this because we had to," she replied. "We did it because this house has never felt complete without you." After everyone returned to their afternoon responsibilities, Adrian invited Naomi and Evelyn to enjoy tea beneath the old oak tree overlooking the gardens. Warm sunlight filtered through the branches while birdsong drifted gently across the quiet lawn. Naomi admired the freshly planted white rose bushes lining the stone pathways. "The gardens look even more beautiful than before," she said. Evelyn smiled knowingly before looking toward her son. Adrian answered quietly, "We planted more roses while you were recovering. My mother thought you would like them." Naomi looked at the blooming flowers for several silent moments. "They are beautiful." Adrian took a slow breath before speaking again. "There is something else I have been working on." Naomi looked up with curiosity. "Next month our family will host a private evening at the estate. Everyone whose life has been touched by your kindness will be invited." Naomi immediately shook her head. "Please, that is not necessary." Adrian smiled gently. "It is not meant to celebrate one moment. It is meant to honor a lifetime of quiet compassion that too many of us overlooked." Naomi lowered her eyes, uncertain how to respond. She had spent years believing the greatest reward for kindness was simply seeing another person smile. Recognition had never been part of her motivation. Yet looking at Adrian's expression, she realized this gathering was not about admiration. It was about gratitude finally finding its voice. As the afternoon sunlight settled softly across the blooming roses, Naomi sensed that the quiet life she had always known was about to enter a new chapter, one where the goodness she had carefully hidden for so many years would soon become impossible for anyone to overlook. And somewhere deep inside Adrian's heart, a plan had already begun that would allow an entire room to witness what true courage had looked like all along. The evening Adrian Cole had quietly planned arrived beneath a sky filled with soft golden light fading into deep shades of blue. The Cole estate glowed with elegant simplicity rather than extravagant luxury. Hundreds of white candles illuminated the stone pathways leading toward the grand conservatory, where fresh roses, polished wood, and warm lighting created an atmosphere of gratitude instead of celebration. Invitations had been sent not only to family friends and respected community leaders, but also to hospital nurses, charity volunteers, neighborhood families, members of the community center, and every employee who had worked beside Naomi Carter over the years. Most of the guests arrived believing they had been invited to a private appreciation dinner hosted by the Cole family. Very few understood the true reason they had gathered. Naomi herself knew even less. She had accepted Evelyn Cole's invitation only because the older woman insisted that everyone deserved one peaceful evening together after the difficult weeks they had experienced. Wearing a simple navy blue dress that Eleanor Hayes had quietly helped her choose, Naomi entered the conservatory with visible humility. She immediately noticed the familiar faces of gardeners, kitchen staff, volunteers, teachers, nurses, and children from the community reading program. Instead of drawing attention to herself, she naturally began greeting each person, asking about their families, thanking the nurses again for their kindness, and kneeling to speak at eye level with several excited children who rushed over to hug her. Adrian watched everything from across the room, without interrupting. Once again, Naomi behaved exactly as everyone had described. Even on an evening arranged in her honor, she instinctively focused on making others feel welcome before thinking about herself. As dinner concluded, the conversations gradually settled into quiet anticipation when Adrian stepped toward the center of the conservatory. He did not stand behind a podium. He simply held a small stack of handwritten pages that he had rewritten several times because no prepared speech seemed capable of expressing what he truly wanted to say. Looking around the room, he smiled warmly before beginning. There are evenings when people gather to celebrate success. Tonight we have gathered to remember character. The room fell completely silent. Adrian continued slowly, allowing every word to settle naturally. He spoke about the charity gala, not through fear or dramatic detail, but through gratitude. He described watching one person choose another person's safety before her own comfort. He explained that courage had not appeared in a loud voice or an impressive title. It had appeared in quiet instinct. Then he shared something nobody expected. During the weeks following the incident, he had visited the community center, spoken with hospital staff, listened to employees throughout the estate, and discovered dozens of stories that Naomi herself had never told. One by one, he invited those people to stand. The reading teacher rose first, then one of the gardeners, a hospital nurse, a kitchen assistant, a widowed neighbor, volunteers from the community center, parents whose children Naomi had encouraged. Each person briefly shared a simple memory describing how Naomi had quietly changed their lives without asking for recognition. The stories were ordinary by themselves, yet together they painted the portrait of an extraordinary human being. Naomi listened with growing disbelief. Tears gathered quietly in her eyes as she realized people had remembered acts of kindness she had long forgotten. Adrian folded his notes and looked directly at her. "I believed I was inviting everyone here to honor one courageous decision," he said softly. "Instead, I discovered that your entire life has been a collection of courageous decisions made when nobody was watching." The conservatory remained completely still. Even the children sat silently beside their families. Evelyn gently reached for Naomi's hand while smiling through grateful tears. Around the room, many guests quietly wiped their eyes as they recognized that the most inspiring person present had never sought applause, influence, or admiration. She had simply chosen kindness every ordinary day until that kindness eventually became impossible to ignore. As Adrian looked across the room filled with lives Naomi had touched, he realized the evening had only reached its beginning, because one final expression of gratitude still remained, and it would forever change how every person inside the Cole estate understood the meaning of family, loyalty, and genuine honor. For several long moments after Adrian Cole lowered his handwritten pages, no one inside the conservatory attempted to speak. The soft glow of candlelight reflected across polished glass walls while the fragrance of fresh roses drifted quietly through the evening air. The silence itself became part of the ceremony, carrying more gratitude than applause ever could. Naomi Carter remained seated beside Evelyn Cole with her hands gently folded in her lap, overwhelmed by emotions she had never expected to experience. Throughout her life, she had believed kindness should disappear into the background once it had served its purpose. Seeing so many people remember those quiet moments left her struggling to find words. Adrian slowly walked toward her, stopping only a few feet away. Every guest watched carefully, sensing that the evening had not yet reached its true conclusion. Looking directly into Naomi's eyes, Adrian spoke with calm sincerity. "For many years, I believed leadership meant protecting the people under my responsibility. You taught me something far greater. You showed me that true leadership begins by recognizing the value already living inside the people standing beside us." Naomi lowered her eyes modestly. "I only did what anyone should have done." Adrian gently shook his head. "That is exactly what everyone keeps saying about you. Yet somehow very few people actually live that way." Quiet smiles appeared throughout the room. Evelyn slowly rose from her chair and stepped toward Naomi. The older woman's eyes glistened with gratitude as she gently placed both hands around Naomi's. "There is something I have wanted to say since the day our lives changed," she whispered. "You never allowed me to thank you because you were always asking whether I was comfortable instead." Naomi smiled softly through gathering tears. Evelyn continued with quiet affection. "The day you stood between me and danger, you protected far more than my safety. You protected my family from unimaginable sorrow. There are gifts that cannot be repaid, only honored." Before Naomi could answer, Evelyn embraced her gently. The entire room remained completely silent as the two women stood together beneath the warm candlelight. Several nurses quietly wiped away tears. Parents held their children a little closer. Even longtime business associates who had spent decades attending formal gatherings found themselves unexpectedly emotional. Adrian waited respectfully until Evelyn returned to her seat. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a small velvet presentation box. Murmurs of curiosity spread gently across the room. Adrian opened the box to reveal a beautifully crafted silver key engraved with the Cole family crest. He smiled before speaking again. This is not a symbol of employment. It is a symbol of trust. He carefully placed the key into Naomi's hands. From this evening forward, every member of my family will know that you are not simply someone who works in our home. You will always have a place within it. Naomi looked at the silver key with visible disbelief. Sir, I cannot accept something so meaningful. Adrian answered warmly. You already earned it long before tonight. We are simply catching up with the truth. Gentle applause slowly filled the conservatory, growing stronger not because of wealth or ceremony, but because every person present understood the deeper meaning behind the gesture. It represented belonging rather than ownership, gratitude rather than obligation. After the applause faded, Adrian made one final announcement. Beginning that year, the Cole Foundation would establish the Naomi Carter Community Scholarship, supporting young people whose lives reflected compassion, integrity, and service to others. The room erupted into heartfelt applause once again. Naomi covered her face briefly as tears of gratitude flowed freely. She had spent years quietly changing lives without expecting recognition, and now those countless unseen acts of kindness had become the inspiration for opportunities that would bless generations she might never even meet. Looking around the room filled with familiar faces, Adrian realized something remarkable had happened. Nobody remembered the frightening incident because of fear anymore. They remembered it because it had revealed the extraordinary heart of an ordinary woman, and in doing so, it had quietly transformed every person fortunate enough to witness the power of humility, gratitude, and love expressed through selfless courage. The weeks following the appreciation evening quietly transformed the rhythm of the Cole estate in ways no architect could ever have designed. The grand hallways remained as elegant as before. The gardens continued blooming beneath the changing seasons, and every room reflected the same timeless beauty visitors had admired for years. Yet something invisible had changed within the people themselves. Conversations carried greater warmth. Employees greeted one another with renewed respect, and even longtime staff members remarked that the mansion somehow felt lighter, as though gratitude had become part of its foundation. Naomi Carter returned to her familiar routine with remarkable humility. She refused every suggestion that her daily responsibilities should become lighter simply because so many people now admired her. Each morning she still arrived before sunrise, arranged fresh flowers throughout the estate, greeted every employee by name, and quietly asked whether anyone needed help before beginning her own work. The silver key Adrian Cole had entrusted to her remained carefully tucked inside a small wooden keepsake box rather than displayed proudly. To Naomi, it represented responsibility far more than recognition. Evelyn Cole often found Naomi working among the white rose gardens they had planted together after her recovery. One peaceful afternoon, they walked slowly along the stone pathways carrying small watering cans beneath a brilliant blue sky. Butterflies drifted lazily above blooming flowers while the distant sound of fountains blended with cheerful birdsong. Evelyn looked toward Naomi with gentle affection. Do you know what has changed the most since that evening? She asked. Naomi smiled softly. The roses are growing beautifully. Evelyn laughed quietly. Yes, but I was thinking about people. She paused beside one of the largest rose bushes. For years I hoped this home would become known not because of our family's influence, but because of how people felt after leaving it. Somehow you accomplished that without ever trying. Naomi lowered her eyes modestly. I only tried to treat people the way my grandmother taught me. Evelyn nodded thoughtfully. Then her wisdom now lives inside hundreds of others. Meanwhile, Adrian had quietly devoted weeks to transforming his promise into lasting action. The Naomi Carter Community Scholarship officially opened applications through local schools, community organizations, and neighborhood churches. Rather than rewarding academic achievement alone, the program sought young people whose lives reflected compassion, honesty, perseverance, and service to others. Teachers, social workers, and volunteers eagerly submitted nominations describing teenagers who quietly helped classmates, cared for aging relatives, volunteered after school, or encouraged struggling neighbors without expecting recognition. Adrian personally reviewed every application, often reminded of the countless stories he had learned about Naomi herself. One afternoon, he invited Naomi into the estate library, where several large binders rested across the polished oak table. "These are the first scholarship applications," he explained. Naomi carefully opened one folder and began reading. She smiled warmly after discovering that many nominees had been recommended not because they were the most talented students, but because they consistently lifted other people through small daily acts of kindness. Adrian watched her expression with quiet satisfaction. "Your example is already reaching people you have never met." Naomi closed the folder gently. "Then they are the real reason this scholarship matters." Adrian smiled. "That answer is exactly why it carries your name." Later that evening, the first scholarship recipients visited the estate for a simple dinner with their families. Instead of formal speeches, everyone gathered beneath strings of warm lights in the garden, where children laughed freely among the roses. Naomi spent most of the evening listening to the students describe their dreams, while encouraging each one with genuine interest. She never spoke about herself unless someone asked directly. Adrian observed quietly from a short distance, recognizing once again that Naomi's greatest gift had never been one extraordinary moment of courage. It had always been her ability to make every person standing before her feel seen, valued, and capable of becoming something greater. As twilight settled gently across the gardens and lanterns began glowing beneath the trees, Adrian realized that one selfless decision made during a frightening evening had grown into a legacy of hope touching lives far beyond the walls of the Cole estate, proving that genuine compassion never ends with the person who first chooses it, but continues quietly through every heart it inspires. 1 year later, the first light of spring settled gently across the Cole estate, bathing the white rose gardens in warm golden sunlight that seemed to linger a little longer over every blooming flower. The mansion looked exactly as it always had, with elegant stone walls, graceful balconies, and peaceful fountains reflecting the morning sky. Yet anyone who visited could immediately sense that something far more meaningful than beautiful architecture now lived within those grounds. Kindness had quietly become part of the estate itself. Naomi Carter walked along the familiar garden path carrying a woven basket filled with freshly cut roses destined for the entrance hall. She moved with the same quiet confidence she had always possessed, greeting every gardener, housekeeper, driver, and cook with genuine warmth before beginning her own work. Despite everything that had happened during the previous year, nothing about her character had changed. She never expected special treatment, never spoke about her own sacrifices, and never accepted praise without redirecting attention towards someone else. The silver key Adrian Cole had entrusted to her remained carefully protected inside the same small wooden box, because to Naomi it represented trust rather than status. Adrian stood quietly on the balcony overlooking the gardens, watching the morning unfold below. There had been a time when his attention had focused almost entirely on business reports, security meetings, and responsibilities that seemed endlessly urgent. Now he found equal importance in moments that could never appear on a financial statement. Watching employees laugh together while preparing the gardens, seeing scholarship recipients return to volunteer during school vacations, and witnessing his mother smile more often than she had in years reminded him that true success could never be measured only by influence or wealth. Evelyn Cole joined him on the balcony, carrying 2 cups of tea. Looking toward Naomi below, she smiled with quiet satisfaction. She still has no idea how many lives she continues to change every day. Adrian accepted the cup gently. "I think she knows," he replied softly. "She simply believes that changing lives is something everyone should try to do." Evelyn nodded with affectionate pride. Later that afternoon, the newest Naomi Carter Community Scholarship recipients arrived for their annual gathering. Many of the students had never met Naomi before, yet each carried stories of serving neighbors, tutoring younger children, supporting elderly relatives, or volunteering throughout their communities. Instead of delivering a formal speech, Naomi spent the afternoon walking through the gardens with the students, listening to their dreams, encouraging their ambitions, and reminding them that compassion often begins with the smallest daily choices. Adrian observed those conversations from a respectful distance. Every student walked away smiling, not because they had met someone famous, but because they had met someone who truly listened. As evening approached, the scholarship recipients gathered beneath the oldest oak tree on the estate for for one final photograph. Naomi stood quietly near the back, hoping others would take the places of honor. One young girl gently took Naomi's hand and guided her toward the center. "You belong here," she said with innocent certainty. Naomi smiled through grateful tears as everyone gathered around her. The camera captured a simple moment that reflected something far greater than any ceremony ever could. It preserved a legacy built not upon power, but upon compassion. It remembered a woman who never searched for recognition, yet inspired it everywhere she went. It honored a family that discovered genuine strength only after learning to recognize the quiet courage already standing beside them. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the gardens, and the evening breeze carried the fragrance of blooming roses across the estate, Adrian looked toward Naomi and his mother standing together among the scholarship students. In that peaceful moment, he understood that the most extraordinary stories rarely begin with people seeking greatness. They begin with ordinary hearts choosing kindness when no one is watching. Wealth had built the Cole estate. Leadership had protected it. But one humble Black Maid had given it a soul. And from that day forward, everyone who entered those gates carried home the same unforgettable lesson. Dignity grows wherever humility is protected, gratitude is remembered, and love is expressed through selfless courage rather than words alone.